Hey, maybe you're watching this video because, like me, you've gotten kind of tired of all these really high fantasy tropey games with end of the world stakes. You wanted to play something a little lower scale and more down to earth. How do we as game masters find games that bridge the gap between crunchiness and freedom of rules or minimalist type games? The problem is, when you say lightweight, there are these certain players at your table who are going to groan. What they really don't like is things like having to roll for their random stats and not having any say in what their character's customization is. What if I told you there's a game that lets you have your cake and eat it too? Lightweight rules on the GM side of the screen, but enough, let's call it crunch and customization for your players. Well, friends, look no further than this game right here, Crown and Skull. I've personally found a lot of times when I present these old school style games like Knave, Shadow Dark, DCC, or even old school Essentials, that my players they lose a little bit of excitement when they hear these titles. And I think it's because they really enjoy this idea of theory crafting their characters, building them up with all this customization and options, and expressing themselves through the mechanics of the character builder. Now, what's really nice about Crown and Skull is you lose none of that, but you still have a game that's pretty simple in its basic mechanics. It's a game that will still give your players lots of things to dig through without having entire pillars of tabletop games just vanish because your character can do it all. There's still a need in this game to track items and things like torches if you want, but there's also enough customization that your players can have magic and abilities that suit their style of roleplay. And now that I've actually had a chance to play it, I find that while the customization does give you a lot of options, it doesn't leave you staring down at your character sheet the entire time you're playing the game, which is a huge up for me. Not to mention, I'll go into this a bit later, but the tips on the GM side of things in this book are amazing. This is an all encompassing book that covers world building, character concepts, and just good old fashioned tips to run the game. I always forget to mention this in my videos where I tell you to go and buy games, but I'm not sponsored by any of these companies in any way. I went out and bought this book just like you did. I'm just really excited about what's inside of it, and I think you should check it out. Crown and Skull is a very different but interesting game that's worth your time and money and attention. And while I still think this is a pretty rules light and minimalist game, it is about 343 pages. So by no means is there not enough content in here to keep you interested for a while. Okay, before I get into the details of what makes the character creation so interesting, we have to talk about what makes it a rules light, or I'm going to call it a minimalist game. One of the things is the attrition system. Instead of using your basic stats or even hit points, there's none of that in Crown and Skull. And this attrition system is based on the skills that your character has and the items that they carry in their inventory. Whenever your character takes hits from enemies, they start marking off skills and equipment. That's kind of your hit points, if you will. But this also means that as you take attrition, you're able to do less things in combat or outside of combat. Let's say the jailer came over and whacked you in the head with his club. Well, you might lose that muscle skill and therefore your ability to bend those bars and sneak your way out of the dungeon. You're going to have to try something else now. And the same goes for equipment. I'm sure you're already seeing the ways that this is a very simple system. And at times, it could be very deadly as well. There's sort of an unspoken rule within the book that says your characters shouldn't just fill up their inventory with little petty items in order to stockpile their health. These smaller petty items all get stored into a single item slot known as the pouch. This is a side note, but the reason I've been looking for more games like Crown and Skull is because I've become sort of disenchanted with the larger epic fantasy genre. I just think there's only so many world-ending threats or cosmic shaking forces you can throw at your players before it gets a little tired. Games like Crown and Skull allow you to really have these classic lower scale conflicts, and death and things like that are still on the table. Okay, so let's crack open the book and look at some of the character customization I'm talking about. This is the part of the book that really got my mind reeling and excited and thinking that maybe those players that are less excited about old school gaming might still have something they really enjoy in Crown and Skull. And before I forget, Crown and Skull is a roll under system, meaning that once you put those skill points in and build up your character, the only thing you're trying to hit DC wise is rolling under your own skill that you decided how many points you wanted to spend in. That and neither monsters or players roll to hit. Instead, you actually roll an evade skill, and that number is altered depending on the monster's attack skill. And also, just like in games like Mouse Ritter, you just roll your attack damage die, and then the monster's armor might soak up a certain number of damage. As long as you roll more damage than their armor absorbs, you deal damage. I really like this system because it reminds me of a mixture between Dragonbane and Mouse Ritter. Character creation. One thing I found whenever I was creating a character in this game is that it has really excellent creative and narrative character prompts right out of the gate. Let's look at a few just to show you the examples. There are 4 character prompts, and I'm just going to read a few of them to you. I am a blank, equipped with blank. It all started when blank, but now I blank. Then there's a D20 table for each of these prompts. I am an afflicted human. Stricken with years of injury, these folks struggle on. I am a sure-footed stout folk. Some dwarves are less bulky, but have larger feet, making them skilled climbers and distance walkers. That's just prompt number 1. Equipped with axes and hammers. You prefer the heft and balance of headed weapons, and the crushing, chopping fighting style there found. Equipped with vials and magic baubles. You revel in oddities, artifacts, ingredients, trinkets, curios, wands, and jewelry. It all started when I left the cult. Madmen and fools! I escaped by night, never to return. It all started when I was taken prisoner. I was very young, and I've been a nomad ever since. And last but not least, prompt 4. But now I seek and destroy evildoers. My purpose leaves evil no quarter. But now I sell my skills for coin. I have released the upturned nose of morality and destiny. I do jobs. I am content. So already you can probably see how these prompts are really evocative and get your mind thinking about your character's backstory and not just what they do in combat. I like this as a middle ground or jumping off place where you can really get character ideas and concepts moving without having to do too much work outside of the book. Okay, now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this book, the custom character creation. Now, there are some template characters in here if you just want to jump into the action and tweak a few details, or if you're not really sure where to start and you want to figure out how the game is played before trying to jump straight into your own custom character. This is a very different game than, say, like D&D or Pathfinder, and it may just throw you off a little bit getting into it. Here's something really cool about this game. So everybody starts with 50 hero points to spend, or if you want, you can choose 2 flaws that will each add 5 points for a total of 60. Then you're going to want to choose your core ability. Your core ability costs 15 points and does something like this. Battlemaster. You've been trained as a soldier who knows how to hit hard. When you roll maximum damage, roll again. There's no limit to the number of times this dice can explode. Protector. When you use a shield, change a failed defense roll by an ally into a success once per round, if they are nearby. And just a note, as the squishy weird wizard guy, this was the ability that saved my life many times. Okay, so once you have your core ability, then you get to focus on your skills. Now, skills in Crown and Skull are bought 1 for 1. So literally, if you want 10 points in evade, you can just spend them there. And remember, this is a roll under system. So one way to think about it is every point you spend in a skill is a 5% chance towards being able to use that skill successfully. And to start out, no skill can be higher than 18 or lower than 3. So if you take a skill, you have to spend at least 3 points in it. I don't recommend, however, just sprinkling skills all over the place and having a lot of 3-point skills, because that's only a 15% chance to succeed in that ability. And in total, you can only have a max of 10 skills. And just while we're here, you can only have a total of 20 of anything on your character sheet. So 10 skills, 10 pieces of equipment, that makes for around 20 HP, we'll call it, or 20 attrition. So once you have your core ability, and then you spend your points on skills, you're going to want to use the rest of the points you have left to buy equipment. Now, unlike your skills, equipment really vary in point cost. For instance, a backpack might cost 6 points, while torches only cost 1. But then again, you're going to want all your staples like a dagger or a battle axe, which costs 1 or 5 points. And then, of course, some armor like a leather vest or chainmail. If you're anything like me, you're going to want this cloak, which gives you a +3 to your stealth skill. There's a ton of other stuff. I'll just show you a quick list while I talk about it. And while we're here, I'll just state that all characters start with a 6 in defense, so you have at least a 30% chance to avoid attacks. Armor increases that defense number, so you have a higher likelihood of rolling under it. But then enemies might modify that number as well, lowering it so that they are more likely to hit you. If you take attrition to your skills, or maybe damage to an item that you're carrying, you can either heal that later or repair it. Now, one of my favorite things about Crown and Skull is the intense level of customization. I think so far I've really undersold just how much customization there is in this game. It's insane. You're building an entire character from scratch every time. So if you have those kind of players who are really excited about character customization, they're going to love this part. When I say that you can customize every aspect of your equipment and your spells, I really mean that. Let's look at some of the weapons, armor, and tools you can customize. Now with weapons and later on spells, you can start with a base die that you want it to deal, like a d6, d8, d10, or d12, and then you can modify it from there. Here's just a few of the gear effects you can add to any custom weapon. For instance, a deadly weapon can add an additional damage die of the weapon's type. A balanced weapon can ignore one target defense to attack with this weapon. You can reinforce your armor, you can add bleed, you can even upgrade your die. Then if you want to get really finicky, you can add some gear limitations to increase the number of points you have to spend on that item. Now you can always take the basic templates for things like items and magic, but if you want to get into the crunchy side, there's plenty of opportunity for your players to dig down and get excited about their concepts. So let's take a peek at some of the spell customization real quick. There are some basic critical concepts for all spells listed here that we'll just go through really quick. The way that spells are cast, the fact that a magic skill is used, the somatic components needed to cast those spells, the duration that spells work for, their effects, their range, and how many targets they affect. Then we have a list of basic spells here. Similar to the templates for basic weapons or even characters are these basic spells. But then, as is everything in Crown and Skull, you can modify it to the extent that you want to. I'm going to go through a few of those ways you can modify your spells. Accuracy. Boost an upcoming damage roll. Additional cast. Add a cast to this spell. Spell customization also has those limitations like you saw with the items. It's just a way to get a few more points to spend on other things for your item or spell. I'm just going to read off a few of my favorites. Under the limitations list, Madness. Each time this spell is cast, roll on your magic skill. On a failure, take the crazy flaw until your next rest. Red Speech. This spell can only be cast with booming, shouting words. This limitation prohibits the use of silent spell. Then we have things like unstable and infernal magic. And I didn't even realize this the first time I looked through the book, but there's an entire Path of Magic section which has different ways to implement magic later in the game. These are just really cool ways that magic might manifest through your character or paths that it might lead your character down. While there is some mechanical benefits to this chapter, it's a lot of things for the GM to take and implement and ways to inject magic into their game. Paths like the Starfallen, the Ancient One, and the Demonologist. I'm not going to get into everything in this video, but there's a ton of other really cool things about Crown and Skull. Like for instance, the way that phases work in lieu of initiative, and how monsters are affected by when they act in different phases. Or how easy monsters are to run using their tactic die. Not to mention, there's a great setting already built into the book, and it is so evocative and has so many ideas that you should just check it out and read it. This is a book you're really going to enjoy reading front to back. Like for instance, there's a section about heroes and villains of the realm, and there's just enough in each blurb to create an entire campaign off of. Oh, and a whole section on orders, guilds, and factions. It gives me the basic concepts I can build off of without overwhelming me with superfluous details. And I haven't even started to talk about the excellent GM advice that is just littered throughout the entire book. Everything from ways to run hex crawls to tables and treasure, and then this really fascinating section called the Atlas, full of ideas of how to generate regions and dungeons in a useful and actionable way. And I don't really have time in this video to totally dig into this very fascinating idea of mapless dungeons. Okay, and then it's chock full of all the standard stuff that you expect, like enemies, magic weapons, things like that. But again, this video is already getting long, and I might save that for another time. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it has inspired you to check out Crown and Skull and try some new and interesting things in your game. Maybe this book is the jumping off point that your players need to finally get them from being stuck in games like 5e and Pathfinder. Not that there's anything wrong with those games, but like I said earlier, I just get a little bored with the epic fantasy genre after a while. And if you are too, try Crown and Skull. I think that's it for today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment on what you find interesting about Crown and Skull, or another game that you think bridges that gap between crunchy and customization, but still leaves room for minimalist, emergent play, and leaves things like exploration, tracking items, and death still in the game. Like I said in my last video, I'm trying to do some more things with Patreon. I might end up doing a Patreon game, so check that out over there. I'm probably going to do a Discord channel pretty soon, just so that I have other ways to communicate with people. Or you can join my memberships on YouTube if you want to get things like emojis and a little tracker next to your name that says you're subscribed. Every bit helps this channel grow and gets these concepts and ideas out to more and more people so they can see games that you might not otherwise notice. So if you enjoy what we do here, do those things. Thank you for everyone who already does. Appreciate you guys watching. And as always, remember, make mistakes, choose chaos. Most importantly, have fun. All right, this is long and silly. I'm done. I have scoured to the heart of the archives deep and traveled to the top of the cinder cloud peaks and forded the everplains for the answers I seek. So beware of the realms where you meddle, for the fates can be fickle when the dice settle.